Materials used in this presentation are period in nature and used for educational purposes only. Furthermore, when videos are used, they are utilized in conjunction with the photographs to produce continuity, in some instances are composites, and fall within the purview of the fair use doctrine of United States copyright laws. Attribution is given where required.
Welcome to the True Crime Man's Dark Imagination YouTube channel, your source for interesting and factual crime. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can stay up to date on any future programs.
Throughout this series, we have tried to present cases that may give us some insight as to the reasons behind various murders. There is a continuing cycle of evil that prevails in the minds of killers. This profile presents the facts of a most unusual case, a case that seemed to spawn many suspicions going into different directions, and served throughout history as the epitome of one man's determination to disgrace his legacy through infamy. On March 30th, 1892, a new tenant moved into a Windsor suburb house in the city of Melbourne, Australia, and complained of a terrible smell coming from the residence. Police arrived at the house and noticed the stench as well. Beneath a hearthstone near the fireplace, authorities located the body of a woman about 30 years old whose throat had been cut, buried, and decomposing for approximately 3 months. Melbourne police assigned 2 detectives to the case, Detective Sergeants William Considine and Henry Causey, and they set about investigating into the previous tenant. The leasing agent informed the 2 police officers that the previous tenant, a man named Druin, ordered that some cement, a broom, a trowel, closet pan, and a spade a few weeks earlier be delivered to the Windsor residence. Druin had been described as in his mid-30s, fair-haired with reddish tint and red beard, and a large distinctive mustache, and was of medium height and build. Mr. Druin dressed with a lot of flash, with a lot of jewelry and fine clothes. After an intricate search of the Andrew Street house, Detectives Considine and Causey discovered a worn luggage ticket that stated Druin arrived in Melbourne from England on December 9, 1891. On a passenger vessel named the Kaiser Wilhelm II, accompanied by his wife, Emily. Then Druin traveled under the name of Albert Williams. Detectives Considine and Causey also questioned the other passengers on the ship and
had no trouble recollecting the loud, boasting, oafish behavior of Mr. Williams, who brought anyone who could find to listen to his obviously fictitious adventures to every corner of the globe.
Williams also accused the passengers and crew of stealing valuables from him during the course of the journey. Detectives Considine and Causey believed that the badly decomposed corpse found at the residence located at 57 Andrew Street could have been no one other than Emily Williams. After their suspicions had been semi-confirmed that the woman buried under the hearthstone fit the general description of Emily Williams, the authorities issued a nationwide alert for Williams, and his description appeared in every police station all over Australia. The detectives believed that if Williams stuck to his modus operandi, he would not be that hard to apprehend. With a fugitive on the loose, the story of Emily Williams grabbed the headlines and saw the story travel throughout the world. A few days after the issuing of the description, an employee from a passenger liner stated that he recognized a man matching Williams's description who boarded a vessel on January 23rd from Melbourne to Perth in Western Australia. Detectives also learned that Williams had been traveling under another assumed name of, quote, Baron Swanston, end quote. Police finally located Baron Swanston in the small mining settlement of Southern Cross, where, upon his arrival, he took a job as an engineer in charge of machinery at the Fraser gold mine. Finally, on the day after Emily Williams had been laid to rest, Police officers in Southern Cross wired Melbourne detectives Considine and Causey, and they received a wire telegram from the area where Williams had been spotted that the police held the wiry suspect in their jail. Williams stated when police arrested him,
I am innocent. I have never been to Windsor, to the best of my knowledge. I do not know where it is.
After visiting the suspect in Southern Cross, detectives Considine and Causey became more familiar with the man they knew as Druin or Williams, but later discovered his real name to be Frederick Bailey Deeming. Frederick Bailey Deeming was born on July 3, 1853 in Kent, England, to respectable parents. At the age of 16, after an unsuccessful career as a petty thief, Deeming went to sea, where he earned a living committing small crimes and fraud under false pretenses. Deeming made it back to England in February 1890, where he bigamously married a woman named Miss Matheson, whom Deeming deserted later. At the time, he already had a wife and 3 children. At the time of this philandering, Deeming and his English wife were expecting their 4th child. At some point in this time, Deeming and his wife fought incessantly, culminating in her disappearance along with the 4 children, including the newborn child. Deeming explained that his wife was really his sister and she left to be with her sailor husband. Deeming fled the area and went to Australia in September 1891. He rented a house at number 57 Andrew Street in the Melbourne suburb of Windsor, from where Deeming disappeared in March 1891. Deeming made it a habit to prepare himself before moving to his next victim. In preparing himself for the murder of Emily Mather, known earlier to police as Emily Williams, Deeming met and became engaged to another woman, with the understanding that she would follow him wherever he traveled. Before Deeming left the house at 57 Andrew Street in the Windsor suburb of Melbourne, Australia, he paid the rent in advance and subsequently met his betrothed. Deeming was now, as they say, in the wind, at least until authorities captured the fugitive in Southern Cross. When the passengers on the ship that traveled from Perth in Western Australia to Melbourne with the Williamses gave their statements to police, there seemed a great disparity between any resemblance of the woman described as Deeming's wife and the woman found under the hearthstone at Andrew Street residence. More specifically, that Mrs. Williams appeared to be older and huskier than the woman found underneath the hearthstone, shorter with a darker complexion. Detectives Considine and Causey believed for a short time there were 2 Mrs. Deemings. Looking to investigate whether Deeming may have been responsible for other homicides, Considine and Causey found a dinner invitation from a small village located approximately 14 kilometers from Liverpool, England, known as Rainhill, at the Commercial Hotel. Authorities cabled Liverpool to investigate the dinner. Local police inquiries led them to a woman named Mrs. Mather, who owned a news agency. Mrs. Mather also happened to be the mother of Emily Williams Deeming, the young woman found beneath the cement on Andrew Street. Mrs. Mather collapsed when detectives informed her that they discovered her daughter's body. Mrs. Mather also stated that she rented property in the area as well, and the authorities should make inquiries into the property that Williams rented in Rainhill. When police finally investigated the goings-on in Rainhill, they discovered that a man matching Deeming's description rented a house named the Dineham Villa for his employer, a Colonel Brooks, whom Williams expected would be arriving in the area soon from India. The colonel never materialized. When Deeming awaited the arrival of his alleged employer, he stayed very comfortably in the Commercial Hotel, and every night while there he went to the bar and regaled those who would listen with tales of his global travels. Deeming met Emily Mathers while in Rainhill, and after a whirlwind courtship, the two were married on September 22, 1891. Before the two departed on a lavish honeymoon to Australia aboard the Kaiser Wilhelm II, Deeming held an expensive party while still owing thousands of pounds in bills to creditors in Rainhill and London. Before Deeming and his new bride left for Australia, residents in the area remembered the children who used to play around the Rainhill residence, and then, all of a sudden, they were not there. After hearing several of his stories, local authorities in Liverpool made their way to the house and broke in. What they discovered was a most pungent odor. that of death. When they discovered the source of the malodorous aroma, authorities began digging at the fireplace. They used crowbars and shovels to get through the hearthstones and the earth beneath. To their horror, they uncovered
the bodies of a woman and 2 children, all in an advanced state of decomposition. The corpses were wrapped in oilcloth. The woman lay upon her back, while the 2 children were turned with their faces downward, lying one on each side of her.
Even after authorities dug up the decomposing corpses, the smell still permeated throughout the house. In continued searches and digging, the police found 2 additional bodies, those of children, one, a small infant, and another small girl at the woman's feet. The woman and the 9-year-old girl were strangled, and the other children suffered throats that had been cut very deeply. As news of the discovery spread throughout England, 2 men came forward and identified the dead woman as Marie James, the wife of their brother, Frederick Deeming, and the children discovered underneath the hearthstone as being the children of Deeming and James. Deeming and his wife, Marie, returned from Australia with the young infant in tow and visited his brothers on the way to Rainhill. Since he returned, that was the last time they saw their sibling and his family. With the discovery of the bodies at Rainhill, just a short 2 weeks after the discovery of Emily Mather in Australia, police felt more pressed to interrogate Deeming than ever before. Authorities took Deeming under armed escort from Southern Cross to Perth for an extradition hearing. If successful, Deeming would return to Victoria in order to answer the charges of murder in the case of Emily Mather. During the 5-day trip from Southern Cross to Perth, Deeming was said to have fainted 3 or 4 times and claimed a lack of appetite. Over the long journey, police escorts kept watch over him and never removed his handcuffs. When the train arrived at the small town of York, the town gathered around the station to, quote, see the man they heard slaughtered his entire family and a second wife, end quote. When Deeming stepped into the daylight, he raised his manacled arms and shouted, quote, ladies and gentlemen, you need not look at me. I am not guilty, but I have been victimized, end quote. At the next stop, Perth, the crowd grew so large waiting for the accused murderer that the train had to stop ahead of Perth, and the prisoner was taken in a waiting van the rest of the way into the waterside lockup. When the prisoner arrived at the lockup, an inventory of his belongings contained a few photos, a silver case with Emily engraved upon the lid, a double photo frame with a photo of Deeming and the other side containing the photo of a cute 6-year-old girl, and the last photo in the separate frame that contained the photo of a father, a mother, and 3 children. Interestingly, the inventory's trunk also contained a small timetable for trains to and from Rainhill and St. Helens Junction. And then the authorities inventoried a small battle axe with a very sharp blade, a mason's apron with the initials FBD monogrammed on the front of it, and a small common prayer book. Furthermore, the trunk contained a set of various knives. On March 24th, the Perth Police Court arraigned Deeming. His attorney, Richard Haynes, QC, desperately fought the extradition request, stating that his client would not receive a fair trial in Melbourne as, quote, the angry mob that had formed outside the Perth courthouse demonstrated, end quote, angered by the very thought that this prisoner actually murdered 2 women and 4 innocent children. The judge in the case took the argument under consideration and then granted the order of extradition. On March 27, 1892, Deeming, Detective Causey, 3 armed police officers, and 2 reporters boarded the train to Midland Junction outside of Perth to make the 250-mile journey to Albany in southwest Australia with the ship SS Ballarat for the next leg of the journey to Melbourne. On their first stop, the train took on more coal and water. What the police escorts were unaware of was that someone telegraphed ahead to alert the population at the stop that the train contained the accused killer. By the time the train arrived in York, a large crowd stood ready to confront the prisoner. Many of the women in the crowd yelled, quote, lynch him, end quote, quote, drag him out, end quote, and pull him out by the bullocks, end quote. The armed escort and Detective Causey became so concerned as to whether there would be any extra-legal action that the shutters on Deeming's car had to be closed in order to conceal his location on the train. At this point in time, the crowd, not fooled at the concealment, pushed on the train and someone from the other side threw a brick through the window. Deeming became very scared and begged the officers in the compartment to protect him from the maddened ensemble. The train then pulled from the station, headed to the next stop. On their way to the next stop, Deeming seemed to have a, quote, fit, end quote, so to speak, where he thrashed around violently to the point where it took 4 men to hold him down until the conniption subsided. With his head badly bruised and swollen from the episode, the officers determined that Deeming may have tried to escape with this fit, but when he saw that it failed, he resigned himself to his fate. When the train finally arrived in Albany, the police escorts made sure that the incidents that occurred at past stops did not occur when they arrived near the prison. The prisoner transfer occurred without any further incident. Detective Causey and other officers planned to stay in the jail overnight, transporting the prisoner the following morning to the SS Ballarat, finally making their way to Melbourne. When they awoke the next morning to take charge of their prisoner, the guards noticed something very odd. The attribute that eventually led to Deeming's capture was gone, shaved off of the prisoner's face with the edge of a broken medicine bottle found in the cell. Later, guards discovered that Deeming plucked 75% of the hairs from his face before using the broken bottle to shave the rest. Deeming accomplished this even under the watchful eyes of round-the-clock surveillance in his cell to make sure that he did not harm himself. Detective Causey expressed concern regarding the removal of Deeming's mustache as it altered his appearance greatly and would have helped the prosecution's case. Now, the prisoner looked completely different. When the party arrived in Adelaide, the officers guarding Deeming learned that a large crowd already gathered at the docks waiting for the suspect. Rather than attempt to board a train with their charge and risk his abduction and lynching, Detective Causey and the other officers decided to take the ship all the way to Melbourne. When the journey continued, Detective Causey noted that Deeming became very moody and began to comprehend the hatred and animus toward him. Deeming stated to one of the police escorts, quote, "They might wait until I'm found guilty. Many innocent men have been hanged. I'm not afraid to die. If I have to die, I die like a man. But first I'll make sure some revelation that will astonish the world." End quote. On April 2nd, 1892, at approximately 9 a.m., the Ballarat anchored in Port Phillip Bay, and the police escort immediately brought Deeming to the police court where he stood for the charge of murdering Emily Mather Williams. When asked to give his name, Deeming refused to answer the court, and therefore the court charged him under the name of Albert Williams. Deeming's trial began on May 2, 1892 in Melbourne, Australia. The defense counsel alleged that the defendant was insane at the time of the crimes. However, 6 mental health professionals examined Deeming at the time, some as many as 6 examinations, and none of them could state with any certainty that Deeming was, in fact, insane. The trial lasted a total of 4 days, and the evidence appeared beyond a reasonable doubt that Deeming murdered Emily Mather. When other medical doctors testified, they stated that Deeming suffered from epileptic fits that may have been caused by his advanced infection of venereal disease that may have certainly affected his mind and thinking processes. Doctors mentioned that Deeming exhibited moodiness, was, quote, loquacious, and fantasized about his past, end quote. The defendant even went so far to say that his dead mother ordered him to kill wife Emily Mather, and that, quote, sometimes he had been overwhelmed by the irresistible impulse to slaughter the current lady in his life, end quote. A prison physician, Dr. Shields, presented his findings to the court when he testified,
"I have frequently conversed with him but cannot believe anything he says."
As to whether Dr. Shields believed that Deeming knew the difference between right and wrong, Dr. Shields added,
"That stealing, for example, was a matter of conscience. Murder also permissible in certain circumstances."
Dr. Shields concluded by saying that Deeming related that often he would go out at night armed with a pistol to kill the women that gave him venereal disease. Deeming, who always believed that grandstanding was the best method to get people to believe him, took the stand in his own defense. The gallery exhibited fascination with the man in front of them who may have been responsible for the murder of 6 people, including 4 children. The accused sometimes closed his eyes as he related how the public prejudged him before the trial. With this publicity in mind, Deeming asked the jury if there were 200 people in Australia that would not convict him. Deeming then went on to say that Emily Mather was not dead. The defendant continued to profess his innocence throughout the testimony. Although there may have been some sympathy throughout the beginning of his testimony, that sympathy died quickly as Deeming bragged about his travels and exhibited, quote, an insatiable ego, end quote, with his descriptions. The impression that Deeming left with the gallery and jurors was one of a sane man obsessed with his own existence and the ability to eliminate any person who got in his way from achieving even the most deviant desires, that with the fairer sex. The ruse that Deeming tried to portray fell short of the mercy the jury was willing to give in this case. The verdict they rendered was guilty. After a failed appeal to the Privy Council, Deeming was hanged at the Melbourne Gaol on May 23, 1892. After death had been certified, prison officials shaved the hair from Deeming's head and face and then made a death mask. On the next day, prison officials moved Deeming's body to an unmarked grave at the Old Melbourne Gaol, then moved his body to another unmarked grave at the Pentridge Gaol.
Because of the most recent research that suggests Deeming was Jack the Ripper, his antics have resurfaced to give us one more suspect among the myriad of others. Deeming murdered his wives and children, and not in the same way as the murders of the Whitechapel killer may suggest. If Deeming were the Whitechapel murderer, it seems apropos to murder them in between the times that he murdered his wife and 4 children, as some historians have suggested. Although he did admit to Dr. Shields that he went out on the streets some nights with a pistol, looking for the woman who gave him the dreaded venereal disease. But his chosen weapon was a revolver and not a sharp knife that Jack the Ripper used to dispatch his victims. Therefore, we can only add Deeming to the long list of suspects who may or may not have been Jack the Ripper. Although the courts found Deeming guilty of the murder of Emily Mather, he still paid for the crimes that he committed back in England. What we seem to forget sometimes as a society is that although someone may be responsible for the wholesale, premeditated, and callous murder of others, one death sentence is just as good as another. Until next time.
If you enjoyed our presentation of true crime, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to receive notifications on any future programs.